All right, so we are live with another episode of the Rob Anderson Show. I think this is episode 18, although I don't keep track quite so much, but I'm really honored and excited for my next guest. Thank you so much for coming on to co-create with me, Neha Kumar, and thank you so much for coming on. As I said, I really, really appreciate it. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Rob. It's lovely to be here. I'm doing good. I'm doing great. How are you doing? How has your day been?
Well, like I said when we were chatting a bit beforehand, I got some really great news this week about finally, it's been about a 6 month delay since I was supposed to start flight school to become a pilot. And so it was kind of, it was like a long winter, like we were kind of talking about. But I finally got that news, I think it was yesterday. So I try not to be too attached to outcomes, but it was something I was really looking forward to. So there was that, and I wasn't expecting, because it took 6 months, I was like, well, maybe it's going to be another month. And then I got the news yesterday, so it kind of shifted my energy a little bit. So I've been really awesome since I got that news, and I'm looking forward to it because it's perfect time for spring, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So I've been having a bit of a restful period for the past few weeks or few months at least. I've just been doing the bare minimum. I've just been taking some time out for myself, just like how we were talking about, like how the nature rests in the winter and springs back into life and action in the spring. I've been having a bit of that sort of a hiatus myself. And now that we finally have the spring, I've been getting ready to get back in action and I'm feeling that renewed sense of energy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you actually go with the flow, because you and I were chatting about that, and I kind of told the story about that lady. I was reading one of her things about how nature goes through that period. The animals hibernate, things slow down, the leaves fall from the trees, and everything's telling us to like kind of withdraw, go within, and then we have, Christmas, and it's like hustle bustle, especially in North America, and it's kind of opposite, and it takes us off. So it's like we're not actually going with the flow. We're not listening to nature. We're not listening to our surroundings. And so it's good that you did that. And I found that too, even though it's difficult because especially, we're like, especially in the hustle culture where it's like, go, go, go all the time, you got to be working 18-hour days all the time, and work harder and all this stuff. So it's really essential to take that time out for yourself. And it's good that you recognize that too. And like you mentioned that you've started doing that recently. Has that something you've always done, or you're just kind of coming to that realization now about listening to your body and listening to the rhythms of nature and that sort of thing?
That's a great question. And no, I wasn't always like this. I was one of those hustle, go-getters for almost all my life. But when I started embarking on my own healing journey, and especially when I started to heal my trauma and heal my nervous system and get it back to a state of regulation, that's when I realized how disconnected I really was, because we are trained as soon as we're born, we are trained by society to start disconnecting from our authenticity, from our spiritual essence, from our voices, from our bodies, you know. And we're trained to do what is expected of us, and we're trained to never listen to our bodies. So that's how I became that um, overthinker and a person who's always wanting to be chronically busy. But then later I started to realize that it's actually my trauma response speaking. It wasn't even my authentic self. That was my response to perceived danger around me. I said, if I sit still, it's just too much. My nervous system said that for me. It wasn't me. When I say me, it wasn't my cognitive conscious thought. It was my nervous system that said, if you sit still, there's way too much danger around you. So why don't we get busy with something? And that's how I became that person. But then a couple years later, when I was 18, I fell sick with an illness, a chronic illness, and I've still been managing that. even after 15 years now. But at a point, 10 years into my illness, I started to realize that no, I think the illness is a manifestation of some form of misalignment. And so I started to heal my illness. And that's that whole journey, that whole journey of healing and recovery was a portal into something bigger. And that's when I realized that, chronic busyness was a response. It wasn't my true self. Because if you tap into your authenticity, every human being, we want to listen to our bodies. And even when our ancestors were in the wild, they didn't really think their way out of danger or analyze or always calculate their way out of danger. They relied on their gut instincts. And our society teaches us to disconnect from our gut instinct, right? Saying that that's just all bull crap and woo shit or whatever, right? So,
Yeah,
it's the contradiction between that's the contradiction that exists in our society.
for sure. And I think it's really the difference between, because you mentioned about overthinking, and I suffered from that for years. And I think it's the difference between living from the thoughts in our head or living from our heart or our gut instinct, whatever you want to call it. I kind of look at them as similar things, right? Like, the living from your heart and listening to your body rather than thinking and analyzing and trying to figure it all out. And that's for myself, like, I totally get it. And you mentioned trauma, and we were discussing a little bit before we started recording about generational trauma. And I'm learning so much about that now. And I think it's way more prevalent than is ever spoken about, whether it's intentionally hid or they just missed the boat about like our genes and our epigenetic recording system and our DNA and how it's passed down from generation to generation. And from what I've been researching and reading lately and listening to some really profound people speak about it, is that it's like we have all of that stuff in us. So we might be dealing not only with the traumas we've suffered in this life, but all our previous ancestors for going back however many generations. That memory is still in there. Whether or not it's activated in us or we relate to it emotionally or mentally or like pain trauma wise, maybe some people are disconnected from it or don't have a lot of it in them. But I think it's really coming to my mind that we don't really know what somebody's going through, especially when it goes back generations. And I sometimes think that they don't even know what they're going through, that it might be stuff that, like I saw this one show and it was about, in the whole premise, I forget what it was a really great movie. But the whole premise was multiple lives or something like that. And it was about fears we have in this life from
Yeah.
something that happened in a previous life. And it was just that was like one of the first times that it made me think about that. I'd never even considered that, and I'm a pretty, I would say, open-minded person. But it's like, wow, maybe we have fears or traumas or pains or whatever that is from a previous life or our ancestors, right? Which in some
Yeah.
kind of ways maybe is a previous life. I don't know how to navigate all that. But what would you say when you started realizing that these were things and issues that were coming up for you? And how did you kind of, what would you say was your aha moment, and what direction did you take after you had that kind of awakening or realization?
Hmm. So I had multiple aha moments. I've had multiple ego deaths, aha moments. I still keep having them. It's a whole process and a journey, right? But the first one, let me see. The first one was in 2015, where I was doing some research. I just had this gut feeling that, this illness is not just an illness. And no matter how many people tell me, how many doctors tell me that it's never going to go away, it's only going to get worse, or things like that, the doomsday, the catastrophizing, I had this gut feeling that there has to be a way out because I wasn't born with it. Something made me acquire it. And so there has to be something to alleviate it, if not completely make it go away. So that I just had that feeling, right? So I started Googling, saying the link between childhood trauma and abuse. That's how it started. And I read some articles, and those were my first aha moments, actually. But it was just that gut feeling that drove the whole thing. Um, so I guess that started it all. Um, and then a couple years later, actually, I saw this person post about narcissistic abuse. She wasn't my mentor back then, but this woman, she has this really, Caroline Strauss, and she's really popular on social media. So I saw some of her posts that said, you know, these may be the effects of narcissistic abuse. And then I started researching on her page about narcissistic abuse, and that was an aha moment, right? And then at some place, I was in this realization in 2015 that everything has a physical, mental, emotional, and a spiritual component to it. Any situation you inquire about, whether it's a disease or whether it's some block you're having in some area of your life, there are these four components to it. So then I started addressing all four components, right? I started looking at my food and food protocols and dietary protocols, and I found a couple of aha moments there as well, because I guess we always knew that processed food was not good for us. At least I always knew that. I always grew up listening to it, that packaged food is not good, just cook your own food and things like that. And in India, I wouldn't eat a lot of processed food. I used to eat home cooked meals because my mom was at home, like cooking for us. But over here, when I was a student in US, actually, when I was in the US, I was a student. I didn't have a lot of time to cook my own food. So that's when my diet got bad. Um, so I came back to this aha moment of realizing what I already knew, saying, processed food is like making my inflammation go bad. It's worsening my pain. So I started to cut back on that and do some elimination diets and like start to get that back in order. And then on the emotional and the mental front, I had this awareness about psychosomatic perspectives of a disease, right? So, which basically translates to mind body connection, psychosomatic, mind and body. So, and then I started to research and see how trauma impacts the psychology and the somatic physiology, and how it manifests into a disease in the physical. And so that was another aha moment. So, but I think everything just came together 2 years later in 2017 when I had a spiritual shift or a consciousness shift that said, okay, you know what? This does not have to be our life forever. We can make this shift. We can make this happen. And I think that was a catalyzing point. And it's only been catalyzing ever since, um, all these years later, too.
That's
So,
amazing. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I'm trying to like think of all the amazing things you've touched on. And it's like when I'm living in the moment and listening, it's like, oh my God, there's so much good stuff there. I think that too, like you said, it's multiple aha moments. It's, whether people call it, refer to it as the Great Awakening. I think that that's a good way to look at it. But I heard recently, and I think it's more relatable, is a great remembering, because it's like we
okay.
forgot who we are, what our essence is, that we're all divine spirits having a human experience, really, right? And I think that, we were talking about DNA and all that stuff, epigenetics and stuff. And I think that really what's happening to us is that we're growing out of some of our DNA restrictions as the planet's shifting, the energies are changing. I'm not as spiritually in touch as some of the friends that I have and people that I speak to. So I'm not maybe the best person to talk about all that, but I can feel it. I can feel a difference in who I am. And I don't think it's just, some people have told me, oh, it's just because you're growing up and you're getting older.
Mm.
And I don't think it's only that. I think that there's certain things happening right now, the energies of the planet, the timing in history, and all that sort of things. I think there's a lot of other factors going on. We see it kind of culminating. I try not to pay attention to the news in the outside world too much, but there's a lot going on. And I think that a lot of people are saying, oh, okay, the way we were living before, like, all that stuff, it's not sustainable, I don't think, right? And we touched
Oh,
briefly
wow.
upon that before we started talking. And so I was wondering, I hope you don't mind me asking, and any questions that I ask and you don't want to answer, just say pass or whatever. Um, what was like, because I've never been to India. So what are some of maybe the main differences do you see that are right off the top of your head that are noticeable between, living there and living in, say, the US and then even Canada? So you've got like three different places you've lived, at least that I know of, that you mentioned, that you can kind of compare. And so I guess of that, what made you, I know I've talked to you and Krishna about it a bit before, but what made you end up in Canada on that journey? Or why didn't you go back to India after school and this kind of thing?
Right. The short answer to that is I think life just had it this way. This was what was meant to be. Life just kept leading us to this place, and that's how it all just happened, you know. But the longer answer, as far as the differences are concerned, is that um, let's see. Let's see. There's a lot of spiritual charge in India. Like there are many places which have a high spiritual charge that I don't like. Maybe I haven't explored here. Like even if I go to mountains or like the nature spots, I still feel like there's something missing when compared to like let's say if I were in the Himalayas or if I was at the Ganga River or something. There's something there. There is a spiritual charge. Um, but in my experience in India has been a lot of polarity, like this huge polarity. There's a lot of spiritual charge, but for me personally, because I grew up in a narcissistic and an abusive household, there was that stark contrast that I saw. And one of the main reasons why I wanted to, stay back in the US or Canada was because I just wanted to create distance with my family. That was the main reason. But that's in my personal experience. I haven't seen that great polarity here in my day-to-day living experiences, which is why I guess I stayed back here. But I know a lot of people who missed their family and they went back and all of that. And that's understandable because they have a supportive family, they feel safe there, they have a community. And that's another thing I really like about India is that there's more community spirit as when compared to here in the US and Canada, I feel. Um, but then there are downsides, right? So a community spirit is good, but then the society tends to move towards the spectrum of enmeshment and codependency. Like, you have to just be enmeshed. You have to be like with us. You can't think differently. You can't have a separate opinion. Of course, it's not a generalized thing. At least in my family and my circles, it was that way. So that's what I saw from my personal experience. And over here, it's the far end of the other spectrum, which is hyper independence, which is not healthy either. Neither is that healthy, neither is this healthy. We want that balance, right? So, but initially, because I got out of my family, I created some distance from my family when I was studying in the US. It felt really good. It felt like, okay, now I don't have people on at my back. I can just do whatever I want. It was like this newfound freedom. And I just loved the fact that nobody would give a shit about you in the US.
Hey, you can't swear on this show. I'm just kidding.
What was that? I'm sorry, I missed it.
I said, you can't swear on this show. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
I swear too all the time. I was like,
so initially that was so exciting, to have that hyper independence and just do everything by myself. And, it was exciting. But now, a decade later, even Canada is kind of similar that way, right? The society tends towards hyper independence. Now, a decade later, because of my own healing journey, because of healing trauma again, and understanding that neither codependency is healthy nor is hyper independence, we need that's a trauma response too, by the way, right? Hyper independence is a trauma response, the one that I had. And now that I feel safe and open to have connections, like authentic connections. Now I know that, we want to have a balance, so that was something. And then what else? What else? I think I just, yeah, So for me, my personal experience wise, I like being here. Unless I'm visiting some spiritually charged places in India and I'm, with myself and Krishna and not interacting with toxic individuals around. I would love that experience as well, as I do love the experience of being here as well. Just the two of us by ourselves with, all of you good friends. So yeah, I mean, I think there's pros and cons to every place,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
and you
Well,
learn things as you go along in life. Everything teaches you something. Every experience teaches you, right? So,
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that. One place you should check out is the Peterborough petroglyphs. It's probably a
hmm
little bit far from where you guys, but apparently that's a vortex in Canada. So apparently
hmm
there might be a good spiritual charge there. They've got some old, like ancient, I guess I don't know the whole story about it, but they're like petroglyphs, so they're like carvings or something or paintings. I went there one day and I forget what day it was, or maybe the time of year. It was kind of early in the year, and it was by the time I got there, it was closed, so I didn't actually get to go there. But I want to go back there, so because apparently it's got good energy there and some really interesting stuff. Um,
yeah, yeah. Maybe
oh
I'll ask you to ping me the location or something after
yeah,
this. So yeah,
yeah.
I'll check it.
It would be good because it's all the way out on the other side of like past out like where you guys used to live, right? So
Oh,
yeah, it's out by Peterborough, so it's out east. But
oh
it would be
yes, yes,
yeah, so
yeah.
it'd be
It'll
like,
be far for us. Yeah.
if it was like a weekend where you guys were going into town, or if we were doing a get together or something at Carl's, it's like you could go there and stop, on, so it's like, because it's probably, well, I guess like on a day trip, it would probably be several hours if you were to do it in a day. But one thing I think you touched on that's very, that I wrote down so I'd remember was that like the opposites or the polarity of, being codependent and hyper independent. And I think that it's something we all have to go through. And, I've noticed that too, especially like you said, it's a trauma response, which probably people don't realize. And I don't know exactly where it comes from. Maybe it becomes like I've actually been studying a little bit more about like energy lately and psychic, how we're actually all way more psychic and
Yeah.
susceptible to other people's energies. Um,
Yeah.
I smoked and drank a lot my my whole entire life, so I think I numbed that part of my maybe abilities or whatever, that part of my body out. But since I've quit doing that for the past couple of years, I've becoming more sensitive to it. But I was listening to one gentleman talk about it, and he talks about how like only our energy is compatible with us. So because we'll realize we're gonna get all these tools back that are inherent within us, that we're all psionically capable or psychic. So we have that energy where it's like we cord each other, or if you think about somebody, they can actually pick up on it, or they might think about somebody. It's like, like if you think about somebody and they call you, it's like we're all kind of way more connected than we've been led to believe, you
Yes,
know?
absolutely. I think, like you said, we're way more interconnected as a species than we even think about or we like to believe. And I think every human being is born psychic. We all are born with an intuition. And even as babies, we're so much more connected, but then we lose that connection over time.
Hmm.
And some of us, we realize that at some point in our lives and we start getting that connection back. We start trying to connect back. And I think everybody has that point in their lives where they start to realize that, okay, I'm so disconnected and I need to just go and connect back to myself and to my intuition. And so when that moment happens for everybody, like whenever that is for each individual, I think it'll all start to come back online, your intuitive capacities and all of it, because we're all born with it. We are all psychic. We're all energy beings first and human beings after. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree with what you said. Yeah.
And so it's interesting because for me, it like, I think that maybe women feel it more because they're more, like the brain differences. So like women are more susceptible to those types of energies, where guys are more mental, so they're more thinking and stuck in their heads rather than their feelings. But once those areas start balancing out, and like I said, you mentioned food. So I used to weigh 250 pounds. I lost 90 pounds. So I ate, fast food, like I was working a corporate job and, like traveling 3 hours a day to commute. So I was eating fast food every meal, and I was smoking and drinking a lot and just living like this, like, big city life that you just think when you grow up in kind of a smaller town, it's like you get there and I didn't realize. So there's like all those, maybe that sensitivity to those types of energies is dulled out, right? And so as I've cleaned my diet up and stopped smoking and stopped drinking and things like that, now I'm becoming, oh, maybe there is something truth to this, but it doesn't even really cross your mind. Or maybe it does at certain points in your life, because I've had experiences where I've had like intuition and things and, spiritual connection. But
Right.
you think of it, we're not taught to explore those. So I think especially just, from my own opinion or personal experience, that it's like people think, oh, you're just crazy, or like, or that, they don't believe in that, or you're not told to explore it, or it's not encouraged, or it's not taught. So you just think, oh, it's, oh, strange coincidence or something like that. You don't really see the spiritual connection or the energetic connection, right? And I think,
Exactly.
and like you said with trauma is so even if it's thought energy, I was reading a book and they were talking about how they didn't realize that their thoughts about their son were like almost pigeonholing him, in that they, like, the way they were thinking about him is the way they were seeing him, and that's the way he was showing up. And so they were actually in some strange way psychically limiting him, and he could sense that. So it's like if they think something's wrong with him, he's going to say, oh, my parents think something's wrong with me, there must be something wrong with me, and identify like that. So when you don't
Yeah.
realize that if we're all connected like that, even trauma can be directed at us non-verbally, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think trauma is uh, energetic. It has an energetic component, right? So when we're born, we're connected to our spiritual essence, and then something happens, either energetically, like you said, because we are interacting with disconnected people and disconnected systems around us. So something energetically happens. You show up in a way, and it's not energetically reciprocated. Maybe you show up in a way that's spontaneous or loving, and you feel a micro rejection, right? It's not always just about, the big things like abuse and neglect and things like that happen to you. It could also be a series of micro rejections, because we are interacting with disconnected people and systems, right? So in that sense, it's these wounds inflicted on your psyche, and these wounds are energetic. Everything is energetic, right? And
Mhm.
so, like you said, they were um, energetically imposing something onto the son, and that was their perception of him, as opposed to looking at him for who he really is. So, and what the son did, because for the son, because he's a child, he needs to feel safe first. And if he goes against what is being imposed on him, and he just says, I'm going to be myself, when he's like, let's say, 3 years old, it's threatening his attachment with his caregivers, you see. And so that is a threat. That is a threat to our nervous systems when we're children. What he ends up doing is absorbing that energy and saying, okay, I'll just be who you want me to be. And I'll just get into this people pleasing mode. So I don't threaten my attachment with you. So
Yeah.
it's this wound inflicted, and it's also something that threatens your attachment, that is perceived by your younger self, and that ultimately causes your younger self to abandon its authenticity, because you want to stay safe, because you don't want to risk a threat. So it's a neurobiological process as well, but which ultimately starts from an energetic imprint or an energetic wound.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of good stuff in there, and thank you for explaining that. And one thing that I kind of realized a few years ago was people pleasing, and like I think coming from a separated family, with my parents kind of, you know, they separated multiple times when I was a child, but eventually permanently when I was about 8. So, but I was used to it by then because I think they'd probably done it three times before that. So, but I found myself living as this like diplomatic relation between my mom and dad, right? Where it was like I was like, what, you know, not that they weren't totally non-agreeable, but just the little things that you pick up on about like they're not seeing eye to eye on things. So they're like, you know, it's almost like they want you to pick sides, or they're, you know, and it's like, and you feel torn as a kid, you know, between your two parents, and you know, and it's like all you want is your family to be together and to kind of be normal. I remember when we were in grade 5, I think it was, there was only in our whole school from kindergarten to grade 6, there's only 5 kids without two parents, right? So we had this
Yeah.
like group that we would go to, and it was good, but it was such a small group that like nobody really knew. I didn't realize till I was much older the effect that it had on me. And so when you said people pleasing, wow, that was like something that I just probably, you know, I'm 40 now, and I realized that I just thought I was like, you know, kind and gracious, and, you know, and I've only realized probably in the past 3, 4 years that I was like, wow, I've been really people pleasing. I thought it was more family related, but then I realized it, and I think it comes from, like you said, that trauma that's imposed and that fear of, you know, especially when it's a parental figure, that you have to please them because they're your source of sustenance, they're your lifeline, they support you, you know, when you're a child at that age. But then it goes through to when you're older, especially coming, you know, I'm sure kids that have both parents still might feel that.
Yeah.
But I think it was compounded for me because I had a lack mentality on top of that, because the people pleasing, my family felt split apart, and I was trying to keep what was left of it together. So it's like, well, if you know, you had a fight with your dad or your mom, then even your small family felt even smaller, like if you weren't talking to them or something like that, you know. And so that combined with my lack mentality and the people pleasing extended into my adult life almost. And I didn't realize it, that it was like I'm making concessions, or giving in, or being the person to say sorry all the time, or where I don't need to be, you know. And it made me develop some maybe unhealthy relationships, or maybe people didn't respect me because I was you know, I wasn't putting up those boundaries, right? I wasn't putting up healthy boundaries, because I was scared of losing friends or family, you know, and that was an unhealthy way. And so I think that it's really important that you mentioned on that.
Yeah. And that's
So
a big one because I have gone through the same phase too. Because I started doing what was expected of me, as a way and please the parent figure, because I just wanted to stay safe. I just want to keep myself safe from abuse, right? And that usually, you know, like wanting to stay safe is the start of all our adaptive and also maladaptive coping mechanisms to an imminent danger that we're sensing. You know, as a child, you probably sense that if you did something that would threaten your attachment with either of your parent figures, right? And so that's how you began to adapt to that imminent danger through this coping mechanism of people pleasing, right? And when you do it multiple times, for let's say 20 years before you move out of your parents' place, that becomes a familiarity, a loop of familiarity within your system. And so you'll continue to do that unless you bring in this discernment, like you did, that, okay, I don't see why I need to be repeating this loop anymore because I'm not surviving what I survived in the past, right? Like as a 3-year-old child, I may have needed certain coping mechanisms, but as a 33-year-old, I probably don't need this. And that's the start of your healing journey too. You know, that's when you'll start to see, okay, how do I let this go? Because letting go is not just a mere, you know, mindset shift, right? It's in your neurobiology, it's in your system. So letting go of a trauma response or letting go of a coping mechanism is a lot more than just journaling your way away or um, just mindset shifting your way through things. And that's when it gets started, you know. So yeah, it all
So
starts
true.
with that discernment. Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing too, I'd say with addiction, because like, I think it was Mark Twain, he had a quote that I always remembered, and it was like, a habit cannot be thrown out the window. It has to be coaxed down the stairs one step at a time. And it's
Yes,
so true
that is so,
because like
yeah.
I smoked for 24 years, smoked cigarettes for 24 years. And in that time, I probably quit smoking 1,000 times.
Mm,
Like how many days? Like, and I used to beat myself up. There was so many times where I was like, this is the last cigarette ever. And then the next morning I was buying another pack, because I actually wrote this down the other day, that it was a good thing that, because foundational healing, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah, everybody thinks that, oh, okay, well, why don't you just quit smoking, or why don't you just do this? So people who don't understand that, and it's like, well, it seems so easy, and then we beat ourselves up because we can't do something, and the foundation isn't secure. You're not on a good foundation. It's like a house built on sand, and so you can't make this beautiful roof if your foundation's crap. And
Yeah,
so
and
the root cause analysis needs to be looked at, right? Not just like, oh, like, so I had to look at, why do I smoke cigarettes? Like, not because they're addictive, okay, that's fine, but like, why? Like, why? Like, like, go down the rabbit hole of going back through your life. And obviously, like, everybody in my family smoked this and that, whatever. I can look at all those things, but realistically, it's more than just like, oh, I'm just going to quit today. Maybe for some people it works, but for other people, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's, you know, uh,
right.
abuse. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why people have addictive or bad habits, right? And so you need to look at the root cause analysis of those things before you just get rid of them. And then it becomes so easy. You're like, oh, now I know.
Exactly, exactly. And it's one step at a time. It's getting, like you mentioned, the quote, you've got to coax it one step at a time. And sometimes that takes years. You know, just like how you talked about smoking, my blind spot is emotional eating. Like it's not too bad for me. Like I don't have an eating disorder or anything. But when I'm stressed, I reach out for food. When I'm happy, I reach out for food, even though I'm not hungry, you know. It's not a whole bag of chips, it's maybe five, but I still know that that's a pattern that I need to work on, you know. And I still have it, you know. I still have it. Just this afternoon I just stress ate a little more than I should have, for example. Or you know, when I'm trying to set boundaries, even though I've done so much work on it for all these years, even now when I'm trying to set a boundary and say no when I mean no, I still feel it. I still feel it in my stomach, you know, but you eventually train your nervous system to move through the fear, as opposed to just get stuck in the familiar.
Mhm.
So yeah, I definitely relate to what you said.
I I'm
One step
totally.
at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was an emotional eater too. I'm actually right now, I'm on day coming up. Yeah, it'll be probably just almost 48 hours. I'm doing a fast again. So
Oh, you did.
yeah,
I
I've
used
been,
to be able to do them, but not anymore. Oh my gosh, I can't fast.
I've just been, I just do it because like I said, well, I was very overweight at one point. I weighed 250 pounds, and so I'm just doing it more for like a cleanse type thing, like not to lose like a weight loss thing or anything. I didn't actually start fasting till I lost all the weight anyways. Right now it's more like a system reset for me, and just almost like an experiment to see what the body is capable of, and to see how I feel, and see how, like I've done a lot of studying for about it and things like that. So I'm not for or against it, but I think that a lot of like what we've been talking about food, I think a lot of, even if you're eating healthy, if you're still buying stuff from the farms, even if you're eating really healthy food, even if it's not processed, unless it's like really organic. And I was talking on a call last night that we were on, that like apparently here in Ontario, even organic food still, to be considered organic, I think there's still 2 pesticides that they actually use on it. So realistically, the only way to know you're getting pure, like love grown, homegrown food is to grow it yourself. So, but
Right.
I think the fast is more to give my body a break from processing like toxins more than like maybe some people do it for weight loss or whatever, but it's more for a system reset, because I heard it's good to like, if you do, I think, a 3-day fast, apparently your whole like immune system resets, right? So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
why not try it, right? So you said you've tried it. Have you tried it in the
No harm
past?
in trying. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing about, especially about food, right? Like you said, even the most organic food still has these pesticides, and we live in buildings which are painted. And so we're still breathing toxins on some level. Um, and I don't know if things can ever be 100% perfect. So
I think
yeah.
we all need our own little bit of land and to grow our own organic little farms. I don't know if you remember Anna from the Quantum Lounge.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, her and her partner, they used to do like small plot plug farming, and I'm gonna have her on one day because she knows so much about that type of regenerative small plot farming, and it's like I find it very fascinating how much we can actually grow. And I'm not that good, but when I was living with my brother and his fiance, they built a garden box. So there was one or two summers, maybe three, where we were actually growing stuff at the house. And it's like, it's noticeable, right? Like, and it's like you grow it with love, and it's just like it feels like there's like something to it, right? It's good and healthy, it wasn't sprayed, how it was grown, it was taken care of. And so I think that, like we were talking about shifting from the old world and the new things coming up, how do you see, well, I guess maybe maybe just for anybody watching, explain where you're at now, because I know you're kind of doing something different than you were, and you're kind of branching out and starting your own business. And I think it's related around trauma and narcissistic abuse, right? And so maybe explain that a little bit about what made you passionate about that, and kind of what type of therapies or what type of modalities you'd say you'd use.
Yeah. So, what I'm doing now, right now, I am a trauma-informed coach and a narcissistic abuse recovery practitioner. And I'm trained in modalities like brain spotting, trauma-informed modalities like brain spotting and somatic healing. So I help my clients recover from the trauma associated with narcissistic abuse or any form of trauma, really. It could be any kind of non-narcissistic related trauma from childhood, or it could be an acute trauma situation that they're trying to recover from. I help my clients recover from trauma on, through holistic methods, um, which are mind-body based, which are energy based. And the reason I do this is because I think that everybody deserves to live a fulfilling life, where they don't just survive, but also unapologetically thrive as their authentic selves, and they put forth their authentic expressions in life, and they create and experience the life they desire. And oftentimes, trauma is that block which is coming in the way of them being able to experience life the way they want to. And it's just my passion to help them get that, maneuver them from that block, or help them move through that block. So I know, since your audience are mostly into spirituality, in spiritual terms, what you can think of what I do as helping someone with their shadow work, so that they can experience the light, because they're dealing with their shadows. That's what trauma work essentially is, shadow work. And so I wasn't always doing this. I was an engineer. I completed my engineering in electrical engineering, and I did my master's in the US, and I was also working a corporate job. My life on the outside looked amazing. I was just checking off all the things I need to check off as a 20-something-year-old. And people were really envious of me. My parents were really proud of me because I just checked off all these things of their list. Essentially, it wasn't really my list, which I realized much later. I was under this impression that finishing your studies and getting the job and starting to work and earn a paycheck was like that golden ticket to happiness. But when it actually happened, when I started getting those paychecks, I was so miserable. my health was so bad. I was always in pain. Like I was in a lot more pain than I am these days. So that's when I started to ask that question, that is all of this really worth it? Like I checked off all these to-do lists and I'm earning that paycheck that people told me would bring me happiness and joy because I can afford the things that I want to like buy and like, I don't know, support myself. But then that did not fill in the gap that I was feeling. I was just getting more and more miserable health wise, physical health wise, and mental health wise. And so that's when I said, enough is enough. I really need to start working on my health because I really need to start looking at what this void is really within myself. And that's when I started my self personal inner work or my self I don't want to say development work, which maybe I could say because it is essentially a self development work, right? So when I started embarking on that journey, eventually I found out that um, since that was never my authentic self, wanting to work in that, I didn't even authentically want to study engineering. I wanted to do something related to, I wanted to study psychology or, do something in the related field to directly make an impact on people's um, emotional health or energetic well-being. I said, I'm just going to take that leap of faith and transition into this new career. And I did certifications, I did my trainings, and um, yeah, that's how I'm here.
That's awesome. And you know what? I have a similar story, and like you mentioned before, it's like multiple moments, and the things that we're passionate about change too, right? So like, and that's the thing too, is you mentioned a while back on the conversation about letting go is difficult. And I think that it doesn't matter, whether it's a job that you went to school for. You said something I had to write it down because you were checking things off your parents' list. And that's a huge thing. And it took me so long. That goes back to the energetic cording I was talking about, and that psychic connection that we don't realize we have. And so the guy I was listening to, he said that's probably the worst thing that parents do, is that they're always projecting this psychic energy, like, Rob should be doing this, or Neha should be doing that. And even if we're not in the room with them or across, it's like we can feel this energy, but we might not know it. But
Yeah.
it's them thinking that they want the best for us. But we grew up in this time where I think it's shifting. And this guy I was listening to, he said that in the way the world is currently, he said most people shouldn't be having kids till they're 80 years old because they have to do the work on themselves first, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned self-development too, and that's kind of what I don't like the term self-help, because I don't think that we need help. It's like development is a better word. And I
Yes.
think I think even the best word would be like almost like release, because we're getting rid of stuff. We're not really like we're developing our authenticity, but it's like we're
It's we're
like,
remembering. Yeah, we're
yeah, yeah,
remembering our authenticity. Yeah.
yeah, remembering, or it's like we're this spirit stuck in a statue and we're like crumbling and we're like breaking the pieces off, and finding out what's underneath in a way. And so I think that's really important, is that, it's wonderful that you've realized this at your age. And me too, I feel very gifted, because some people go through their whole lives without being able to do that, without letting go. And I think I read a book by, I think it was what's David Hawkins or whatever, and it's a very good book, and it's titled Letting Go. But
Right.
it's like the addiction thing. Letting go is very difficult sometimes. Sometimes it takes, like you said, years. And so I think that's what people have to be really understanding with themselves, because I've seen it with friends who've, maybe died of overdoses or committed suicide and things like that. That in this culture, there's not enough leeway for people. It's like, so, well, you got to do this or you got to do that. And I think that it's very, very powerful to take the time. I've taken it several times in my life, probably once each decade. When I was about, I think, after working a corporate job for a few years, I took what I call the micro retirement, because I
Mm.
realized that job, okay, I would go do a job and I would kind of like grow at that job and move up, and then, you know, like number one in sales, and then heading up the division, and then once you're at that, there's no room to go after you're the head of a division, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, and things like that. So you feel like, where am I going to go now? What am I going to do? So I called it at the time my micro retirement, but that it was just time to do nothing, to just understand, and like you said, some self-development, or chip away at the armor we've placed around ourselves, maybe to deal with, like you said, coping mechanisms. All these coping mechanisms become armor on
Yeah,
us, right? And
absolutely.
and that's, I think, what happens, like you said, it develops into illness. It gets, you know, it's emotional traumas, all those things, pain and suffering, things that we've gone through, they build up and they create these densities in us, and we have to
Right.
let all those go.
And there is what we touched upon earlier, the ancestral baggage or the generational trauma. Oh, that's a very real thing, because I was doing this workshop where we trace 7 generations above, you know, and just trace 7 generations above and see what they might have been going through at the time. And it's very real because I felt energetic releases, like that person was like that person who I've never met or who I've never seen was actually within me. I felt the lift. I felt the release, when I was doing that workshop. And
That's
I've
awesome.
also heard by, I think it's by Dr. Gabor Mate, where he says that um, 80% of the time, the way you show up is shaped by generational or ancestral trauma rather than your own personal trauma itself. So, if there's a chronic illness, at this point, even on my healing journey, like I know my personal stuff. I know what energies are mine. I know what energies I absorbed from my parents. I have that separateness or the distinction between different energies. And there's this other door that's opened, the ancestral baggage, right? So at this point, I know that my chronic pain, I don't want to say my chronic pain, the chronic pain that's in my field right now, there is an influence from the ancestral trauma or all those repressed emotions or all of those repressed survival stress. That's part of my energy field. And I'm supposed to get all of that stuckness revving up, so um, so it leaves my field, you
Hmm.
know. So let's say your great grandmother had a lot of anger repressed in her system, which she could never process. And when she has a child, generational trauma is essentially genetic intelligence of survival encoded, survival
Wow.
intelligence encoded in your genes. So when she has a child, based on her upbringing of the child, or even what she has repressed at that point, uh, the genetic encoding in the child is I'm supposed to repress my anger to be able to survive this world, right?
Hmm.
And then when that child grows up and has another child, that's they pass on the same thing. And that's how genetic intelligence passes down like this. Survival intelligence passes down. And henceforth, if it was a traumatic survival, a trauma response as an adaptation to an abnormal circumstance, it just keeps passing down until a person starts to look at it with discernment and starts to dismantle it, and break that cycle.
Yeah,
Um,
it's, yeah, thank you for explaining all of that, because it was like some really eye-opening things, and we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, if you're
right.
not taught these things, or you're not open to hearing them. And that's the thing that a lot of people, like this one guy I was listening to, and he said, it's like you're running this program in your mind,
Mhm.
and unless you can listen from your heart and like hear what the person's saying, like, and like be open to listening to them, it's like it's going in one ear and coming out the other, right? And most people are conditioned not to listen to people, like, like me 10 years ago, if you would have said generational trauma, I probably would have been like, yeah, whatever, like, I'm going for a drink. Like, it wouldn't even been on my radar, I don't think, because it's not even part of our culture. It wasn't part of our upbringing. It wasn't part of anything that was ever mentioned, until you start uncovering these layers and, like, chipping away at that stuff.
Right.
and uncovering that stuff. So it's like, oh, okay, well now if there's something to this, and like you said, like genetic coding and being encoded, and it's like there's so much more to our existence than we've been led to believe, at least, from my upbringing in a small town from Northern Ontario in Canada. Like, and so it's awesome to have these conversations with yourself and other people to like really like it's our opportunity now to co-create and to have, and I think that's the one blessing in disguise, because of the pandemic, was that that's when we met, right? And so I'm really happy that we had the time to get together today, and thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
on the
of
show
course.
to have a more in-depth conversation, because every time we see each other, it's at a party, and it's like, it's not, we didn't get to do a deep
We
dive.
don't really talk a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like
So
surface level stuff because there's so much going on, and things like that. So it's nice to like sit down and actually um have a good conversation and like
right.
learn, yeah, and learn about you, because it's like that's how we learn about ourselves, is through other people, and people who are willing to have those conversations that, like I've, you're one of the only people that I've ever had this type of conversation with, aside from like maybe two other people. So it's not, and it happens organically. So it's really interesting. Like I love hearing the things that you studied and the things that you've gone through, because I think that that's how we're going to heal. That's how we're
Right.
going to heal as a collective.
Yes.
I don't think we were recording when I said that before, is that in the past we had this society that was so hierarchical, and it was like queen, celebrities, famous people, newscasters. Everybody was watching those people talking, and then, so there's a blessing and a curse with the internet and everybody having all this stuff, but it allows us to hear other people's stories, not just the same talking heads giving the same programming over and over. So it's
Right.
wonderful to connect with people and explore these things. And I think it's opening up the world in a way that, is good right now, right?
Exactly. I mean, consciousness can spread faster and wider than unconsciousness can. And with the same technology, the unconscious narratives can spread too, and so can conscious narratives too, and so can conscious awareness of ourselves too. So, yeah,
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing, because it's like, I think that because of that, that's what I think was the eye opener when the past few years that we went through everything. Like everybody was saying, like I've never heard my doctor talk about, I don't really go to them at all, but nobody ever brought up generational trauma. Nobody ever talked about genetic coding. Nobody ever talked about that type of imprinting. Nobody talked about spiritual energy. And so it's up to us to go in and like listen from our heart. It's, I think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of disinformation, but if we can like really listen and discern within our heart and say, oh, okay, start connecting the dots. Well, this person said this and that person said that, and I experienced something similar. And so that's how we start exploring all that, is really being open, because before we were like, everybody was like, well, yeah, well, that's what doctors do. Well, they're not
mm,
doing a good job of, because they're like, to me, doctors are like, they put band-aids on, but we got to get
mhm,
back to the foundational healing, like
yeah,
the root cause analysis of why people are so sick. What is causing them to be sick? The overworking, the unhealthy food, the society that the majority of us are, kind of grown up into. And it's like you said, like the codependence, it's like, well, you want to be a part of that because it looks so appealing, and it's mind energy, it's like your ego saying, oh, I want to get that job, I want to get that car. And then you
yeah,
realize like, oh man, after doing it for a few years, you're like, is it really worth it? Like, is that what I wanted? And then you get it, and it feels empty, and you're like, there's got to be more to life than just, working crazy hours to accumulate material objects, and
exactly. And it's still not filling that void. So what is the void and what fills it?
yeah.
That kind of opens up a whole door of possibilities. Yeah.
And I think freedom to explore and to play and to have time and to not be stressed out. I like, my vision of the future now is like, it's always, people thought like it's utopian, and it's like, well, maybe I always, had this like Pollyanna or pie in the sky type thinking, but I think we're getting close to that now. It's like they're, with the great remembering, and everybody's saying, oh, I think that like old institutions are going to start, well, they have been proven to, they're starting to fall, and people are kind of saying, no, like there's got to be a different way. Like, what would you say as we start maybe wrapping up this conversation? What would you say some of the things that you think your future world, is going to look like? What are you trying to create for yourself? What do you see as the future for, your life in 5 years in the greater world?
For myself, I mean, what I envision is um, to keep growing this conscious career that I've transitioned into. I want to be successful at it. And I want to do it as a clean thing, a clean, this is my sacred sanctuary. This is an extension of my energy. So when you talk about business, you're subconsciously already associating with some kind of subconscious manipulation, or selling or offers and this and that. There is the subconscious manipulation happening, right? i
Mhm.
want to i want to do this from I and I'm already am I'm doing this from a clean place, and I want the new paradigm of authentic, sacred energy expressions, like me with my business and people with theirs, whatever their authentic expressions are. I want them to thrive with that and also be able to um, make a living out of it. You shouldn't have to trade your authenticity for survival. And that's what I envision for myself. I want to be authentic. I want to express myself authentically. I want to put my authentic, energetic vibration out there. And I want that to be my survival and sustenance. And um, that's what I envision for myself. And for others who maybe want to do that as well. So that's one thing. And as a collective, I was really reading this interesting thing that someone was talking about, that we're so caught up in words right now as a collective because we live up here, right?
Yeah.
We've forgotten how to feel. We've forgotten how to feel the vibrational resonance of things. So if somebody comes and tells you something, people ask you for proof. People ask you for the analysis, right? Uh,
Mhm.
but and it's good to look at the proof. It's good to look at the analysis and all of that. I'm not anti-mind, but I think that the mind is not all there is to life, right? And analyzing life is not all there is to life. There is this doorway within ourselves called the heart. And when you can open it and when you can feel the information for yourself, you will feel the resonance of it. And you will be able to discern whether that's truth based on the resonance or whether it's manipulation and lies. And I want people and this whole collective to be empowered enough to start feeling their way into life and things, as opposed to solely surviving out of thinking. I'm not saying that you should give up thinking and analyzing. Of course not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying open this other doorway too, and don't
Yeah.
just live up here. That's something I envision me doing a lot more of, and also that's the vision I have for the collective, really, because that would tell me that the collective is way more empowered than it is right now.
Yeah, I love it. I love everything you said. And really, like you said, like the vibrational resonance. And that's how we have to have those conversations and why we have to have them as a collective. Because, I see the hierarchies falling, like, maybe minimal forms of government, but like I've always had that ability. And like not everybody agreed with me, but it's like I can tell when somebody's talking if they're full of shit. And like
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
whether or not they, it's like, I don't like to judge people. I try to say, observe, or, and I try to be open-minded, and I have a lot of, I've been through a lot myself. I've been through hell and back and so many things, and, drug and alcohol addictions, and not coping with things healthy, and not caring about life really, like, because I was so didn't know how to get out of it that I just didn't care. But so I have no right to judge. So I think in a way that's made me a good listener for other people, because it's like have been through some crazy experiences, and I've have friends who have, and I've met people that have been through crazy experiences. So it's like there's not too much you can tell me that would shock me, that would make, I'd be like, oh, yeah, like, what did you learn from it? Like, how have you grown from it? So, but I think that's the thing, is that in the past, like, people, like you said, people have been analyzing from the mind and not listening to people. And it's like when a politician's lying or they're not being
Mm.
authentic, I don't think like anybody who's reading from a script to say what they're trying. I don't like, honestly, like, for some reason, I don't know, I'm kind of going sideways here. But like, if you're a politician or anybody in any place and you have to read a script, you can't speak from the heart and know what you want to say well enough, then it's not authentic,
It's not authentic. No, it's not. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to remember what you were going to say. Like, it's like you're trying to say something that's not coming from who you are or your center. You shouldn't have to remember that. Like, you and I didn't have a script. We had some, maybe a talking point or two, but that's the point, is that we're co-creating right now as authentically as we can. And it's like, hopefully other people can say, oh yeah, I identify with what they're saying. I resonate with that. And really now, I think what you also, I wrote down what you said too, is that like whatever you mentioned about being authentic and allowing people to be authentic, a lot of times you can't be authentic in a corporation because
I
you're
know you
expected.
can't.
It's like being
Yeah.
in a family, right? You're expected to be like that, a certain way. And I think that was, for me, that was the reason I started doing these shows. And during the pandemic, and I was a little bit scared about putting them up on YouTube because of the content that I wanted to talk about. The
Right.
first interview I ever went on was somebody else's show, and it got taken off YouTube
Mm.
immediately. So I was like a little bit nervous, and I said, okay, well, if they don't want us talking about these things, how can we still be on this platform? So let's talk about, we understand what's happened in the past. I don't think anybody, it's coming out, like everybody's realizing the crap that's been perpetuated upon mankind for all these years. So let's look at the future. Let's look at the healing aspect. Like, and that's why I'm grateful that you came on. So thank you so much for coming on today and explaining part of your journey. Yeah, because I think that's where, so how are we healing? Where are we right now? And what are we looking to, like, what's our most exciting, joyous future? What's that look like for us? And I totally share everything you resonate with the things that you were saying. Maybe next episode, if you'll come back, we can talk about that, because
For sure, yeah.
because
Thanks for having me, and thanks for initiating all of this.
you're welcome.
And yeah, it was so much fun being here, and I absolutely enjoy these kind of conversations. So thank you.
You're welcome. Will you sing for us next time? You and Krishna.
Oh yeah, why not? Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's the best part, right? Like you said, like the residents. And I think that I DJ a lot, and I, produce a little bit of music. I'm not the greatest singer, but I think that music is very healing, and to me, it's very important. And I think that that's maybe a topic we could talk about, the whole music things in resonance. That's been destroyed in our current music industry because everything's auto-tuned, right? Like, I can't even listen to mainstream music because it just sounds like you can't even tell the difference between all the different female and male singers, because they all sound the same nowadays because they're all going through auto tune, right? So it's kind of got this like robotic, like adjusted sound, right?
Yeah, they taken the humanness and the soul expression is like getting minimized and minimized because yeah, it's just more robotic right now. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you once again. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful. Neha Kumar, where can people find you? I'll put links to whatever you want to send me and share. I'll put it underneath in the comment section. But where can people find you in the meantime?
Yeah, so people can reach me on Instagram, and my handle is at the Conscious Soul Coach, and that's my website as well, www.theconscioussoulcoach.com. And I'll send you the links, and you can probably like just add it in the description.
All right. Well, thank you very much once again for coming on. I appreciate it.
Um,
And stick around after. I'm going to stop the recording, and we can kind of debrief. But yeah, thank you once again. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm just like very grateful. And make sure you tell Krishna I said hi.
sure.
Okay, take care.
Take care, Rob.